What's good, YouTube? I know a lot of you guys are already typing down in the comment section without even having heard me out, either defending the point of Bullets being an awesome deck or agreeing with me that it's overrated. I want you to stop right there and actually listen to my words and what I have to say, and then construct your argument for or against it. I like Bullets overall as a deck and archetype. I think they introduced some really cool mechanics that we haven't seen so much before within the game, and I really like what they do. They're a stun deck that has the ability to actually get cards to the field and gain advantage. I like what they're doing, but they are overrated. I am seeing all over Yu-Gi-Oh! Reddit, Yu-Gi-Oh! Facebook pages, and even YouTube just love gushing for this deck and about how great it is and what it's going to do. I'm going to tell you right now, I think less than 4 of these will top YCS San Diego, and not just because it's release weekend. We can look at all release weekends for a really hyped deck. Nekroz, Spiral, Six Samurai, all the way back to the legendary Six Samurais. Every single hyped deck that was truly good was found in droves within the top cut, and I don't think we'll be seeing that with this deck. It will be 4 or less, and I almost think giving it 4 is too much credit for an 11-round tournament. But I do truly enjoy and like aspects of this deck. I just find it overrated. Let's get into why I think that way. Each spell and trap has a clause, except for one of these, that they can only be activated if you control a Bullet. You need a Bullet to activate Never Endorphin, and then the rest of the lines include if you control a Bullet monster. This is a huge chink in the armor, is drawing multiples of any of these cards really hurt consistency. Now, the one that kind of avoids this is Bullet Devil's Deal. It can be set and activated, but it only refers to Bullets and what it protects, and it only protects them from being destroyed by card effects. I was really happy when this card was announced, because as each and every card was announced, I said over and over, this deck needs some sort of protection, some way to protect itself, and it was very important that it saw it. But I still think it's not enough. It's also cool that it has graveyard resources, but Cosmic Cyclone is running around everywhere in this format. A lot of people are playing 2 to 3 in the main deck due to Pendulum Magicians and True Dracos, and it's a card that will just naturally counter Devil's Deal. Now, you do have a card that stops any spell and trap as well, but like I said, despite all these amazing cards, a Regeki Break on top of it, any face-up card, you have all these cards that do amazing things, and they're all hard once per turn. So you're not able to use it again. So once your opponent knows they've forced this card, they don't have to fear again activating in the turn. Perhaps the best card in the Spell and Trap lineup is Cross Dominator. It's a shrink and Forbidden Chalice combined on steroids. It turns a monster to 0 attack and defense, and it negates the effects. It's crazy. Unfortunately, it only lasts until the end of the turn, so reacting to your opponent, it's going to have to do its job. Now, why do I think there's such a problem with a hard once per turn clause? Would it be too broken without the hard once per turn clause on all these cards? It might have been much more powerful, but we would have seen people try to find ways to counteract them activating cards from hand and forcing them to get to the field and then countering them there. But overall, I do think it would have been very busted to make these not hard once per turns, but there's a chink in the armor. The second chink is establishing the normal summon. Basically, you're never setting any of these, and they can only be activated when you have a Bullet anyways, because the Bullets read, you can activate Bullet spell and trap cards from your hand during either player's turn. So they're kind of this walking enabler to play everything as a hand trap rather than committing it to the field. They also all get their effects when a spell or trap is activated in the same column, but it's unlikely that you're filling up columns so much that they have to activate spell and traps in the columns that are across from them. So I do think that part is usually going to be turboed out by yourself and could only be fallen into by your opponent's reckless play. But Establishing the normal summon is very rough, and then only 2 of your monsters are true starters. Shooter Star and Caspar are your true starters, which are somewhat short printed in the set. Caspar allows you to add any Magic Bullet card with a different name from an activated card from your deck to your hand. Basically, when you activate a card behind it, it doesn't have to be a Magic Bullet card, so sometimes this is going to allow you to search basically any Magic Bullet, any card out of everything on the screen right here. The second card is Shooter Star, which allows you to special summon a level 4 or lower Magic Bullet monster from your deck in defense position, except Shooter Star. This is the better starter in my opinion, because once she's out on the field, she can resource you out any of your starter or extender cards, usually Casper, I would imagine, if you're continuing down a line like 2 tables of content or something. But she's probably one of the best starter monsters in the deck, allowing you to put another monster on the field to get its effect. Then the one that's kind of between starter and extender, this one allows you to discard a Magic Bullet card and draw 2 cards. This does put cards in your graveyard for your other extenders, which is very nice. It allows you to draw cards, but the discard is a cost. So you do have to be wary of that. He is also a beefy 1600 attack. You might notice a lot of these stat lines are small though. Caspar having the biggest defense at 200, or my bad, 2000. And then we have 200 defense right here. 1600 attack being one of the beefiest, along with 1700 attack with Shooter Wild. All these monsters kind of get trampled over though once there's an establishment of a field that's hard to take care of, and we'll get into that as well. But then we have our extender plays. Calamity basically does what Shooter Star does, but from the graveyard. It resources a monster from the graveyard to special summon. Shooter Doctor allows you to basically do what Caspar does, but from the graveyard. Also, he resources a card back from the card graveyard to your hand that's a Magic Bullet card. And then Shooter Wild is different. He targets 3 Magic Bullet cards in your graveyard, it shuffles them into the deck, and then you draw a card. He allows you to recycle your resources naturally, get advantage off it, but he has to be an established monster on the field. And that's the second problem of the deck, besides these hard once per turns, is establishing your field, especially going second. And that kind of is directly the third point, winning the dice roll. Establishing your field is hard enough without drawing into your starters, and that's going to hurt the consistency of your deck. Ties of the Brethren is one way people are finding you know, how to counter this, and a lot of people are going with Ties of the Brethren builds. That way they're able to power out their starters, activate cards behind them, and get their effects going. Unfortunately, we have a huge burn deck in the meta that is tearing up the top cut, and it's one of the top 3 right now. Spirals, Pendulum Magicians, and you know, Trick Stars, a burn deck, is probably in 3rd place, if not ahead of one of the 2. All these decks are changing blows to get into the top cut, and are kind of the most represented big 3 that Magic Bullets are walking into. So a burn deck versus a Ties deck creates problems. Now, I love how Magic Bullets work. I love how they resource and they get going, and they're able to actually put pressure on the field as a stun deck. That's very unusual for stun decks, but this is an 1800 beater first off. Second off, Light Stage is going to heavily impact any set cards on the field that Magic Bullets use, because these aren't enough since they're hard once per turn. So you've got to play things that help your stun strategy and help you keep your field establishment, and Light Stage is going to be a huge problem for that as well. My third point here is going to be Masterpiece. It's really big against this deck when it tributes a spell and a trap, because it leaves you having to make an Xyz that deals with them. And yes, you can do that through Shooter Star, but after that's dealt with, how are you going to reestablish a board and activate something like Never Endorphin to get past that Masterpiece? The amount of resources this deck has to do to deal with the card still running in our format, still making its way into the top cut, is astronomical in terms of how much it has to give to climb over it. Another point is Kaijus. Basically, you're going to have a lot of times where going first, you're still only going to establish 1 monster on board to be able to activate these cards, and a single Kaiju could end up having you blown out. Pendulum Magicians are able to do so much. They can do so much with 4 to 5 cards, so a Kaiju is almost nothing to them, and their consistency is very similar to this deck, and being able to resource their whole deck. I think between Pendulum Magicians and this deck, we've never seen two decks really that good at resourcing their whole deck, but you've kind of got to get to Caspar to start, and that's a problem. These aren't warriors that you can just search out, they're fiends, which makes it a little harder, and I just think over all these issues, having to usually win a dice roll. Yes, there's ways to play back going second and play through your opponent's fields, but it definitely wants to win the dice roll heavily as a stun deck. So wanting to win the dice roll and being very thirsty for it. Having to deal with established boards when you don't is a huge, huge problem. On top of that, the hard once per turn clause built into a lot of these spell and traps, along with the necessity of having a magical, is the biggest chink in their armor, in my opinion, that will really hurt your consistency through 11 rounds of Swiss. I think these two things combined really hurt the deck, and then the matchups, the natural matchups of this meta, and what still exists here that doesn't exist for the OCG, along with Spirals. Spirals are still a huge deck, and I think this deck will actually have a decent Spiral matchup, but its Pendulum Magician and its Trickstar matchup are going to be very difficult for it. So thanks for watching. I hope you've heard me out till this point. I know that I'm rustling some jimmies with my opinion here, and that not everyone has to agree with me, but I do hope you hear me out. I do hope that you actually take what I have to say when you're considering maybe playing in YCS San Diego and what you're going to play. I'm not trying to drive people away from this deck. I personally find playing it to be very fun, but for an 11-round tournament, it's going to have its problem. Yes, I think it can take any deck head-to-head. Whenever you're playing a singular match, depending on how the dice roll goes, depending on what you do, I think this can take on any deck head-to-head. But through 11 rounds and lasting through all those dice rolls and positions, times that your opponent's going to draw one of, like Solemn Warning, it's going to be just too rough for it, in my personal opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below. I actually want to hear your well-constructed arguments instead of, John, you're irrelevant, haven't topped in like 9 years, what are you even saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I want to hear your well-constructed, well-thought-out, does Magic Bullets deserve its current level of hype? What do you find so enjoyable about the deck? And as a pilot, do you see its problems and chinks in the armor? That's what I want to hear from you guys. Thanks for watching, everybody.